Now that we've seen the first half, what is in store for the second half? What's the ceiling? What's the floor? We'll discuss it all next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
Okay, welcome in. It is Monday. We are into the second week of October. First full week, second week, something like that. Whatever the case, Nebraska has played 6 games this football season. It is 5-1. The first bye is on tap here this week. No game for Nebraska this week before it goes to Indiana a week from Saturday. I want to talk as we get into this episode, Connor, about the second half schedule for Nebraska. My stance is that the second half now that we look at it in October is even more difficult than what we thought it was before the season and last November when this thing came out. Last November, when the Big Ten did its big schedule release, Indiana was a 2-4 football team with a lame duck coach in Tom Allen, and Curt Cignetti was some 60-year-old guy coaching at a little school in Virginia. Now he's one of the biggest first half stories in college football. I don't know that I'd put him on like Sark and Ryan Day's level, but Curt Cignetti in Indiana are here, and I think it changes quite a bit the way that we have to look at Nebraska's second half schedule. If there's a case to be made, Connor, that it's not as difficult as we thought back a year ago when it came out 11 months ago, is there even anywhere to start with that, or do you think it's more difficult in agreeing with me?
Yeah, no, I'll make the case. I'll attempt to make the case anyway. So the Indiana thing obviously is a lot different than it was. But like you said, that's a program that has confidence now. And I'm really curious to see how it lines up against a real true, Big Ten defense that has an offense that will be fascinating, match them as well. Ohio State, that's par for the course, I think, from what we saw. I don't know what the status quo was on UCLA going into, last November, but I was, they don't look very good. So let's just put it that way.
It was above what they're at right now at 1-4. I think that's
too.
Safe.
I think the same as with Wisconsin. Not that game will be easy in any way, shape, or form for Nebraska. And it might be that way for Iowa too. And so you look at USC, and I think, obviously, I think they've handled like the physical rigors of what the conference has thrown at them so far, starting off with the Big Teniest of the Big Ten schools, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, but getting Penn State, Maryland, Rutgers, and Washington coming up. And this schedule is a gauntlet for them. So I'll be curious to see where they're at come November the 16th. I think there is a case for it that is easier, that it's because I think people were looking at it last November, or maybe as we started the grind of the offseason, thinking, oh boy, you better start 7-0 because that might be 0-5 down the stretch. I don't think that's the case. And now obviously we know more about Nebraska too this year. So easier than we thought, maybe by a hair. But I don't know if it's that ironclad difficulty than people thought it was going to be at the beginning.
You made me look this up. And Tuesday in The Athletic, Austin Meek, our Michigan writer, and myself are going to look at the last 6 or 7 games for every team in the conference, and we selected what are the 5 most difficult schedules left among 18 teams and the 5 easiest schedules left. USC does not rank in either one of those categories, so it's somewhere in the middle, which is interesting because as you read off what USC has, and this doesn't take into account the fact that it's already played Michigan and Wisconsin, it's just the remaining games. It didn't sound all that easy when you read it off, but if you have a minute today, go check out Washington's schedule the rest of the way. for it was almost like not even a conversation that for me that Washington has the most difficult schedule left among Big Ten teams. Now, Nebraska was near the top. I think Nebraska we will have coming in at number 3 among the 18 ranked in terms of difficulty. But Washington, and part of the reason for Washington that it's just so difficult, you have to take into account a bit what Washington has done so far. And it's already traveled out to Rutgers and taken that hit. But every time Washington goes on the road, unless you're going down to Southern California, it's one of these big time zone jumps, which did not exist in the Big Ten before this year. So
Yeah.
as we learned when some numbers were being compiled on Sunday, the Big Ten teams are 1-8 when playing road games in time zones that are 2 hours or more away from their home stadium. And that's something I think that needs to be considered when you look at Nebraska's schedule too. Of course, just one big time zone jump for the Huskers, and then that balances out with UCLA coming to Lincoln in a double time zone jump. But did we expect that it would be that big of a deal to send teams on the road in their nice, comfortable private jets, private planes, private big planes? That it would be, they're winning at like a 11% rate when they travel a long distance. Yeah,
I still tend to look at the matchups and look at the football. Like, this conference is hard. It is a deep conference, and Rutgers Rutgers and Washington played each other, and yes, they had to jump over several time zones. They had to jump over the entire country. But Rutgers is, that's a competitive football team, and they're going to take you all the way to the last whistle. They're going to go to Washington's going to go to Indiana. Washington's going to go to Penn State still as well. So, if they lose on the road at Penn State, which is a top 10 team in the country, is that because they jump time zones, or is that because Penn State's good? Like, so I think there's still a lot of that too. I'd have to look. I wonder, I don't have it in front of me what the 9 individual matchups are. But it's pretty flat, like with the exception of Ohio State and Oregon, I think is in there too. It's a conference where there's like probably 12 to 15 good football, like halfway decent football teams, which is sort of amazing to think about.
Yeah, I think you can read too much into the double time zone thing. I do think it's a factor when teams have to go on the road and fly a long distance and for a game. Jet lag comes into it, and they try to pamper them as much as possible. It's certainly not as significant as like you or me getting on a plane and going to Seattle or out to Maryland. But clearly, there's not that much of a difference between Rutgers coming to Nebraska, which is just a 1 time zone jump, and Michigan going to Washington, which is a 3 time zone jump. It's an hour longer on a plane, or 45 minutes longer on a plane. So that to me, you shouldn't say, oh man, Michigan has a much, much more difficult task in going to Washington than Rutgers does coming to the Midwest, because there's more time. The time itself doesn't matter. It's everything that goes into traveling, and they minimize it for these players. But both of those road teams lost. I think the point here is that when you have to travel a long distance in the Big Ten, whether it's 1 time zone, 2 time zones, 3 time zones, it's difficult to get up and win that game.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And so I'm looking ahead at some of these other schedules as well, and what the teams have before they play Nebraska. Well, it's interesting. Because that's always been a thing in the Big Ten, right? Who you play the week before? Like if you're playing Wisconsin or Iowa or Michigan the week before, that other team, watch out the next week, because that team's going to come in a little bit slower. So Nebraska has 6 games left. Indiana has a bye before they play Nebraska. We know that. Ohio State has a bye before they play Nebraska. UCLA has a bye before they play Nebraska. USC has a bye before they play Nebraska. And so, I'm going to keep going down the list here, but Wisconsin, plays Oregon before they play Nebraska, and Iowa has Maryland on the road before they play Nebraska. I mean, that's tricky stuff. 7 days out from a pretty big game. Whatever it might be, it's tough for anybody. There's buys and playing Oregon. Those are very different things, I guess.
You get an edge clearly if you've got an open date. You get an extra week to prepare. You get time to heal up, and to think that Nebraska has 4 consecutive opponents now lined up that are going to have an extra week to get ready for the Huskers. That's a little concerning. That's a little concerning if you're Dylan Raiola. If you're Marcus Satterfield and you saw what happened with the way that Rutgers schemed up the Nebraska offense, we had our reaction pod that posted on Sunday, and we got somewhat into talking about the struggles of the Nebraska offense. It would, you take a deeper look at it, and it was really tough sledding for Nebraska in the second half of that game. Raiola completed 1 pass that gained positive yardage. Brian Buschini threw for more than twice the yardage that Raiola did in the second half of that game with his 30-yard completion. So now and part of that is Greg Schiano is a very good defensive head coach for Rutgers. Well, now you give these coaches, the next 4, an extra week to get ready for Nebraska, an extra week to get ready for Dylan Raiola, an extra week to watch film and see what Tony White and that Nebraska defense are going to be throwing at them. Now, 2 of those weeks, Nebraska also has a bye. Nebraska has a bye to get ready for Indiana, of course, and to get ready for USC. The 2 of the 3 road games among the next 4. So it evens out a little bit, but it's also something to watch. I think it's a significant factor. And it plays into the thought that this is a tough road that Nebraska has. It's fortunate. Fortunate's not the right word. It's where it needs to be with 5 wins right now going into the midpoint of the season.
They're going to be in a bunch of close games, and the way that they play football will serve them well. So we'll talk more about that as we continue on throughout the bye week here. But let's take a break. Appreciate you guys liking, subscribing, YouTube, at Locked On NEB on Twitter. We're going to have some more social media stuff coming your way, as well. Some interactive pieces for you guys to get involved with. So check us out on all of the platforms. We'll be back after this.
Okay, I want to take a moment here to tell you about LinkedIn and LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for a small business, for your small business, that is, you want to find quality professionals who are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just a job board. It helps you hire pros who you can't find anywhere else, even those people who are not actively searching for a new job, because they're there on LinkedIn. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users do not use other leading job sites, but they do use LinkedIn. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.jobs/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, welcome back. Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone in Omaha, and Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. It was a good football day in the NFL yesterday. There's nothing like when it hits about 2:30 and I'm watching Red Zone and Scott Hansen comes on and he says, "It's the witching hour." And I'm like, oh boy. And there were some wild finishes. We had Lamar Jackson going. That was my day yesterday. I was just totally locked into the NFL because there was no Royals Yankees. We'll wait for tonight to get that thing going again.
Big night on Monday. Big night in Kansas City if you're a Chiefs fan, and I have one of those in my household too. Monday Night Football in Kansas City, Royals Yankees at Yankee Stadium. That couldn't have worked out any better for the infrastructure in KC. Imagine if those games somehow would have been scheduled on the same day. I don't even think that would be logistically possible. They once had I once went to a doubleheader, an Arrowhead Kauffman doubleheader, but it was a preseason NFL game in the afternoon, and it was like 100 degrees, and then walked across the parking lot and went to the K for a Sunday night baseball or a Saturday night baseball game, something like that. I don't think it would be possible with Monday Night Football in the ALDS. But anyway, that's where our minds are at today. In addition to thinking about Nebraska, my Sunday, Connor, was not as relaxing and enjoyable as yours. I was working and kids had things to do. So you're able to enjoy these kind of Sundays without a whole lot of obligations on the baby
Not
in the
usually.
baby realm.
Not
Okay.
well. I mean, there was, but we made do with that piece of it. But I'm not usually home all that much on Sundays. Got some other stuff to do or whatever it might be. So yeah, I took advantage fully of the day yesterday. Let's hope that Brian Buschini did that as well.
He needed a massage.
Yeah, he needed
I
to
would
lay
say.
down for a little while. So Brian Buschini's day on Saturday, Nebraska's punter, he his first punt got blocked and it looked like he got split in half and his body, like went in different directions than probably it should have, especially for a punter. His second punt was a line drive that ended up going 61 yards, and then another one got blocked. And then he got a punt off from the back of the end zone that I briefly wondered if Nebraska should just walk out of the back of the end zone and take a safety in that situation, because I was thinking that it was probably going to get blocked again. Then he downed one at the 5. Then he threw a 30-yard, which should have been a touchdown pass to Jalen Lloyd. And then he punted another one of the 50 from back near his own end zone. And then he smashed basically a game-winning 69-yard punt that basically turned the table all the way in Nebraska's favor. What a day for Brian Buschini.
The way you lay that out, that was fantastic, by the way. Has there ever been a player in the history of Nebraska football who had a more unlikely trajectory throughout a game, just from first quarter to fourth quarter?
Yeah.
From going, motionless on the field for 60 seconds after his first punt to basically winning the game. He was Nebraska's best weapon, period, in the fourth quarter of that football game. That is stunning. The day that he had, that was the Buschini game. His second half is the stuff of legend. Like, that will be talked about. Like, Brian Buschini has been at Nebraska now as the starting punter for 3 years. And when he came in, he said all the right stuff. He was into Nebraska football history. If you remember, did he wear 18? Did he wear Brooke Behringer's jersey? I believe he wore Brooke Behringer's jersey and understood and wanted to wear that and understood the significance of it and embraced things like Sam Foltz and that storyline, which is forever connected to Brooke Behringer, the fallen heroes of Nebraska football. But Buschini on the field has been so up and down. I mean, there's days where he looks like an NFL punter, and then there's days where you wonder what's going on. He's been beat up and inconsistent. And I want to say that Saturday was like his crowning achievement. And now he's going to be received and remembered differently around this program, just because of his performance against Rutgers, being so gutsy to stay in the game and then to play such a huge role in winning the game for Nebraska in the fourth quarter.
There hasn't been very many times in Nebraska's history that they can look back at the game and all that, how it played out and say, yeah, I think the punter was the most important guy. I mean, I don't know, that may have happened like a handful of times. It's probably happened like, 75 to 100 times at Iowa, but at Nebraska, not very much. It's usually about, somebody else is doing something on offense or having a big day on defense. The punter was the MVP on Saturday.
I'm not gonna lie. Like, as I was wandering around the field after the game ended, I was looking for, more so than Raiola or Ty Robinson or Sear Wright, players who, factored in a big way in the game. I was looking for Buschini, and I was hoping to catch a moment with him and his wife, Kelly. And was just curious what it was like for her to watch that game. They came to Nebraska as a young married couple. This is somewhat unorthodox, and you can tell from, I've seen her on road trips, seen her at home games. She is, of course, living every moment with Brian, and to think about the ups and downs that he went through, and that I'm sure she went through in the stands during that game, it had to have been some kind of an experience that I'm interested in hearing about. But I didn't see either one of them, so
That's
that'll have to live
interesting
for
that you
another day.
didn't, because I feel like every time I'm on the field that they're down there taking the picture, in the post game or something like that. But I'm glad he had that day, and like I think you summed it up really well with Buschini. I mean, especially after he gets bent in half and he gets the punt blocked, you're like, all right, number one, is he going to be able to punt again? They're warming up Camden Cook. Like you said it. It's one of the most unlikely like game arcs for a single person that we've seen, because I didn't think he was going to punt again. And number two, I thought Nebraska was just going to like punt on punting. I thought they were just going to be done punting for the day, just because you can't like you.
I don't think that would have worked out all that well.
Probably not. I mean, but they've already kicked aside field goal kicking. Might as well do it the same with punting as well. So yeah, super unlikely. But man, what a day for Buschini.
The whole conversation of special teams, leaves some things out there that probably need to be discussed. This is 2 games in a row now where Nebraska's had a pair of kicks blocked, field goals against Purdue, and then 2 punts against Rutgers. And this is a combination of the blocking system breaking down and the snapping being subpar. So what do you do here? I mean, first of all, it's remarkable that Nebraska, a middle of the road to slightly above average Big Ten team, could win 2 consecutive games where it had 2 kicks blocked in each one of those games. It did. So credit to Nebraska for overcoming that adversity, but that stuff can't happen moving forward. We just got done with this whole conversation about how the schedule turns more difficult, much more difficult in the second half, and the margin for error is, of course, different too. So what do you do? What do you do with special teams? And they're not firing coaches. Like they're not going to do that in the middle of the season, or probably after the season.
Yeah. Well, you have to hope that number one, it gets better, or number two, that you can be so good in other areas that it doesn't have as big of an impact on the game. Right. And that's, I think, probably Nebraska's most likely path to figuring out how to win these close games down the stretch. It's don't, like, whatever you do, don't turn all of these things will just only exacerbate what you have, the problems you already have on special teams, right? Turning the football over, not getting turnovers on defense, not getting, basically just points on offense, right? But in turnovers are a really big deal in that. So they're working on a really, really thin margin right now. And you're right. Conventional wisdom would lead you to believe that the special teams are going to hurt them, and they already have, but they'll continue to do so. But, I think from Matt Rhule's standpoint, he's trying to get them into the mode where they're saying, hey, look, it's just, we need to make one more play. We need to get to this game. Whatever happens in the first, second, third quarter, we'll take it and we'll run with it. In the fourth quarter, we need to make 1 or 2 more plays, and we're going to try and do that. So it's not a bad mindset to have with the way Nebraska's operating right now.
We'll take a break here in a minute. One final thought on special teams. So actually, two final thoughts. One of them after the break, but before we head out for break, the block kicks are basically like turnovers, and in some cases they're worse than turnovers because they can lead to points for the opposition, which so can turnovers. You can have a pick six or a scoop and score. So they're like turnovers, and that's got to be part of what is so infuriating for Nebraska about seeing these block kicks, in addition to other reasons to be upset. But Nebraska has had such an emphasis placed on fixing the turnover margin, and incredibly, it has.
Yeah,
I thought it was reasonable to expect that Nebraska might be like an even team in terms of turnovers this year after being minus 17 last year. It ranks 13th in the country. The Huskers are averaging +1 per game. So they're +6 for the season. 1 fumble lost, which is 6th in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Things are going well in that area, but those, of course, don't take into account the block kicks, which are they don't count as turnovers, but they're kind of like turnovers. So after the break, we are going to talk briefly about Ed Foley, Nebraska's special teams coordinator, and what I think of that topic. That's coming up next.
All right, folks, it's Happer here for Game Time, and it is indeed college football season. Heck, it's the NFL season as well. The playoffs are rolling along in baseball, and it's time to get excited. Man, there is a crisp chill in the air this morning. My house is a little cooler. Game Time is going to make sure that you're going to be in the right place for all of these awesome fall events that we have coming up. It's an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets faster and easier, and prices on the Game Time app go down the closer you get to first pitch or the opening kickoff or when the game tips off, whatever it might be. We're talking concerts as well. MLB games, college football games in the fall, road games maybe for a place like Nebraska. If it's a hot ticket, it's right there for you on Game Time. I love that you could see flash deals, you could see views from your seat, and you can customize your spot in the stadium. It is a one of a kind ticket experience. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Locked On College, $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Okay, back with you on this Monday. Mitch Sherman of The Athletic. Connor Happer is here with me from 1620 The Zone in Omaha. Finishing up our conversation about special teams. You know, there's a lot of questions about Ed Foley and why this is happening, why things are breaking down. And I just want to say this. I think that Buschini's day probably saved Ed Foley from taking some heat, even more heat here in this bye week. Foley, you give him if he's going to take the blame for the blocking, looking poor in the punting situation, then give him credit for dialing up the fake punt too, because that's his scheme. And Rhule has the say on when Nebraska is going to run it, but Foley designed the play, so we'll see where this goes, what the conversation is like with him. But I would like to say that he has been and is such an important part of Matt Rhule's staff. Like, Foley is a Rhule guy through and through. He played a huge role in Nebraska's coaching staff, winning over a lot of Nebraskans with the goodwill and good attitude and work ethic to get all over the state of Nebraska and learn about what makes the state of Nebraska interesting. Like, that's not just a given for somebody who came in with Pennsylvania roots and had coached on the East Coast and had been in Texas. I know as a Nebraskan that I appreciate what he's done and how he's embraced the high schools and high school football in the state. And I've had conversations, like genuine conversations with Foley about small towns in Nebraska and the Nebraska cities. Of course, he loves to talk about the food that he finds in these places, a lot of little details about how the schools are classified and their history. He's genuinely interested, and I think it does mean a lot to the people here and earn him equity. He's a fantastic program guy, but various parts of the team that are under his control are breaking down week after week after week. So what do you do? What do you do if you're Matt Rhule? How do you get him some help? They've already tried with the kicking situation in bringing in Brett Maher, but what else is there to do?
Well, I'll tell you this, first of all, on the punt stuff on Saturday, Rutgers was going to be a team that now Nebraska probably should have seen this and been a little bit more prepared for it, but they were going to shift into that punt block and they were going to come after punts. That's just kind of, that's how they play football. They want to tilt their field in their direction. If they get a block punt, it obviously does that for the rest of whichever half you're in. So there's that piece of it. And so sometimes, maybe either Nebraska's not prepared for that piece of it, or sometimes the other team just beats you. But it's the self-inflicted stuff. And like we were talking about this on our post-game show on 1620 The Zone on Saturday night. I hear people saying, "Hey, look, well, you got to do something. You got to probably fire this guy or something like that." And first of all, like you said, Mitch, before, Nebraska's not going to fire a coach in the middle of the season. It's just not. So I can only entertain that conversation for so much. But also to say this, a lot of Nebraska's problems on special teams this year, a lot of them, that they are not directly a result of this, but I think they stem from the fact that they don't have a guy who they feel like can be a long snapper or a short snapper, a field goal snapper at the moment. So that's important. You've got a kicker injured, and I'm not trying to make excuses for what it's been, which has not been good so far. But if you fire Ed Foley tomorrow or today or next week or whatever, Nebraska still has a long snapper problem, and they still have a problem with an injured kicker at the moment. So I think people just, they want they want some red meat thrown to them. And that's almost never how it works. That's not how coaches think.
Yeah. Matt Rhule has some freedom in some more freedom than has been made available to coaches in the past, because he can just throw manpower at problems. And they have Josh Martin, who was Nebraska's tight ends coach a year ago. He is no longer a full-time assistant coach. Well, he's full-time, but he's not part of one of the 10 assistant coaches who used to be counted as full-time. The coaches who can coach on the field. Martin's there, and his primary responsibility is special teams. So he's there with Ed. They're just going to continue to look at this. They're going to continue to try to attack the problem. I'd imagine that there's going to be a lot of attention devoted to special teams here in the bye week, both practicing it and studying it in the office. And it has to get better. Or it's going to continue to cost Nebraska opportunities to win football games. So I think that's just about where we have to leave the conversation right now, because Matt Rhule is not doing anything rash here in the middle of the season.
That's what the Bible is for, Mitch.
Okay. Want to close the show with this question. You may have noticed that Nebraska has a tendency this year to play one good half of football and one poor half of football. Saw it against Colorado, especially on the offensive side. The defense has been more consistent. On the offensive side, Huskers scored 28 points against the Buffs in the first half, shutout in the second half. They go to Purdue, shutout, shooting themselves in the foot throughout the first half, come out in the second half, score 28 points in that game at Purdue. This Saturday, Nebraska plays somewhat effectively on the offensive side, considering the opposition against Rutgers in the first half, puts up 14 points, second half, can barely get a first down. So why are we seeing this, and what can happen over the next 7 weeks to allow Nebraska to play 4 quarters of football?
That's just not always how it works. You're not going to have the consistent, teams make adjustments. There's still another team on the field. I would like to see the gap between what they show from half to half get a little smaller, and certainly you're striving for consistency all the time. But if Nebraska can get a half that wins them the game, then they're going to take the half that wins them the game, and they're going to try and survive in the other half. That's the story of what that's exactly what they're trying to do. So people might look at this and they might copy and paste Nebraska's first half against Rutgers or their second half against Purdue, and they go over to the other half and they say, hey, if we just do that in the other half, then we probably win 42-7 or something like that. That's just not how it works. It's just,
Is it? I mean, Wisconsin beat Purdue 52-6, and I think Nebraska wins its game 52-6 if it can be 80% as effective on offense in the first half as it was in the second half. You're not going to be able to play a half of good football and win at Indiana, USC, or Iowa, and you're not going to be able to play a half of good football and beat Ohio State or Wisconsin at home. It's about being a 4-quarter team. Nebraska wants to be a 4th quarter team, and it needs to be a 4-quarter team. So again, things to work on in the bye week. We'll hear from Matt Rhule on Monday. He's going to meet with the media today. So in our Tuesday podcast, we will have some thoughts about what the head coach had to say moving into the bye week, reflections on the first half of the season. All that and much more coming up for you later this week on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. We'll do some first half review, some superlatives from the first half, who have been Nebraska's best players, biggest surprises, things like that. So stay with us through this bye week and then into next week, of course, as the Huskers get ready to go to Bloomington for that big game. Might be 2 ranked teams at Indiana next week. We'll see what happens in college football this week, but Nebraska comes in 2 spots outside of the ranking, number 27, effectively going into this bye week. Indiana is at 18th. So thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin has everything you need to get through week 7 of an exciting football season. You can find the link to the Locked On College Football podcast in the description of this show, so there is no need to search. All of it is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.